Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today I have just the distinct pleasure of introducing Lynda Roscoe Hartigan, Lynda, we've worked together, I think, for 25, 30, I mean, it's a long time, right?
Not 30 years. It's probably more like 15 years, actually, Mark.
But, so I mean, it's just wonderful to have you here. You're the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the wonderful Peabody Essex Museum. Could you just describe for us all the place of the Peabody Essex Museum? There were two institutions that were bonded together in American history because we're celebrating the 250th birthday of the country, and this institution, this place, played a huge role in the founding of our nation.
Well, it existed, even right after it, in the Age of Enlightenment for this country. So the Peabody Essex Museum is located in Salem, Massachusetts, which means it's not in Peabody, Massachusetts, or in Essex, Massachusetts, but there is an Essex County, etc. But at any rate, the place was founded as the East India Marine Society in 1799 by this incredibly visionary, intrepid group of business people and traders and sea captains from Salem. And they set out into the world to do business in so many different places around the globe. It's one of the reasons why the museum became such a global kind of collection. And in addition to being very astute business people, they apparently had that collecting gene really, bred in the bone. So as they traded, they also collected, and that became the nexus of the collection. So we do describe ourselves as the country's oldest continuously operating and collecting museum. And from the start, the impetus was not just to collect, but to collect for a community in this new nation. Collecting and bringing the world to Salem was a way to help educate and expose a new young city and its citizens to the possibilities of the world. So that's very, very special. It's been very much a part of the museum's DNA in terms of this curiosity and this openness to exploring the world around you so you understand your place in the world.
The thing that I find to be so fascinating is from this very inception, this idea of cultures being able to enrich what is going on in Salem, Massachusetts, and in the United States of America, that new country, that diverse thinking, different experiences, different ways of approaching the world, the crafts of creating different furniture, decorative arts, paintings, silks, and so on and so forth, metalworking, all of that is not only being imported on a cultural basis, but it also has economic import to those early collectors.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, because they collected under the rubric of, man-made and natural curiosity. So we also do happen to have a really fascinating natural history collection. And it's one of the reasons why in today's version of the Peabody Essex Museum, we do describe ourselves as a museum of art, culture, and science. But the museum obviously has a different name from that East India Marine Society. So there were several ancestral organizations that coexisted in Salem over the 19th and into the 20th century. The Essex Institute being primarily devoted to the county and its history and culture. The East India Marine Society became the Peabody Museum of Science and then the Peabody Museum of Salem. And they intermingled in certain ways, but in other ways they actually competed or didn't get along. But by the late 1990s, because now we're going to fast forward a lot, they were both struggling institutions, even though at very specific moments in their history, like the Essex Institute was very important in the founding of preservation of historic properties in this country, for example. Right. The Peabody Museum of Science, because it was very interested in biology and botany and all sorts of things, had really leading scientists and thinkers affiliated with it. But by the late 1990s, they were both really struggling. And a similarly visionary group of people in New England came together to say, time to recognize that would be really good to join forces. So the Peabody Museum of Salem and that Essex Institute became the Peabody Essex Museum. And that's the merger. And then, we opened as the Peabody Essex Museum really to the public with a new building created by Moshe Safdie in 2003.
And the thing that I think is also really interesting is that required that transformation from separate institutions. It required the board members to come together and put their egos to the side and think about what is best for the institution. Then it required a capital investment. So there was a rebuild. You had to actually meld these different institutions together. And Moshe Safdie did a marvelous job. And then you've done it again, right? You've expanded. You've evolved your collections, and then you've also reinterpreted so much. Could you talk about reinterpreting collections and how? Because at a point you were the sort of the maritime museum and maritime art, and at other points you were the Asian export museum, and now you've got these other identities that are really interesting. So museums are not static, right? They have to reinterpret themselves. They have to reinvent themselves constantly. Talk a little bit about your experience of that in the context of the Peabody Essex Museum.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is really, what makes a healthy organism, and change and evolution are very much a part of that.
And good museum leaders, right? Good museum leadership teams. You're reshaping them all the time.
Yeah. So a little bit of my history in the effort to answer your question. So I came to PEM from the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where I was chief curator, and I came to PEM as its first chief curator in 2003. So, I obviously come from a circumstance where I was very focused on American art into an environment that is this interesting mix of the local and the global, the historical and the contemporary. So it was a great opportunity. And I was brought in to really be a change agent in terms of, the two institutions had, done from time to time small exhibitions and publications. But the idea, based on the vision of Dan Monroe, the founding director of the Peabody Essex Museum, was to create a nationally and internationally meaningful museum of art and culture that would build on our history of innovation and taking chances. So that's been pretty much my MO in terms of how I've approached things. So I was brought in to really build a powerful exhibition program. And that's the opportunity to really, make the most of the talent and the expertise, but in ways that would suggest that, if the purpose of the museum was to really reach into a community to educate, regardless of what circle you're drawing, regional, national, international, that it would be really important to think about connections and the opportunity to juxtapose things in order to help people just think differently about their own place in the world. So yes, we have in terms of the collection, really stellar collections of everything from American, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Native American photography, fashion and textiles, architecture, and African, oceanic, I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Maritime, God forbid I should forget the maritime. So it was like, how can all of those things talk to each other and yet also have their distinct individuality?
Also, the textiles across different cultural
Cultures, yes, and our photography collections span the various areas of the collection. So it was really about how to create dialogue and opportunities for exploration and comparison and contrast. And the part of the strategy was, what are the exhibitions that we could organize? We were not particularly known for doing exhibitions. So how do you break into that whole network of how do you share exhibitions? And initially my strategy was, we have to build a portfolio in order to prove what we could do. It was sort of like the little engine that could kind of circumstance, I think. And so by virtue of doing spectacular exhibitions, then people took notice and were willing to, partner with us. And we've been very good partners with places like the V&A and the Palace Museum in China and that sort of thing.
What's fascinating to me is that and because we've collaborated and we've been part of this, right? We've recruited people.
Right.
Internationally, we've recruited people from the Victoria and Albert. We've recruited people from the British Museum. We recruited people from the Smithsonian who've gone on to the Palace Museum, right? So that whole approach of how do you enact a business strategy by getting the people who are able to bring to the table these connections, this sensibility, these competencies, right? That in and of itself is an art.
I mean, this actually helps me perhaps jumpstart to another point that I suspect you want to get to, and that is that I do believe that most organizations and organisms are only as good as the people and how you treat them in terms of bringing them together for, a common cause or a shared set of values. And so when I returned to the Peabody Essex Museum in August of 2021 as its executive director, because I'd gone on to the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto for a period. It became very apparent to me that, I was coming in at a point in the museum's history where it had proven itself in many ways. And that for the previous 20 years, it had been very museum centered. And how do you create a new museum? How do you create a culture in which innovation and change are really welcomed as the status quo, if you will? Museums, especially art museums, historically have been very object centered. But what became very important to me, and I had to realize that this is something that I have valued throughout my career, people are the creatives who've made the objects, who've made it possible to have the museums. Either by inspiring private collectors or, cities or states or governments to create institutions. So we do now, through our strategic plan, PEM Forward, really characterize the museum as a human-centered museum. I mean, it is meant to really celebrate human beings as an incredible source of creativity. And our mission is really about, celebrating creativity as a nourishing force in people's lives.
Well, and you and I talked last time we were together, we talked about the idea, it's not the objects, it's the stories they tell.
Right.
In dialogue with the artists that are creating them and the people who are experiencing them, right?
Correct.
So it's always very dynamic. It's not, an object is not just something that sits on a wall with a label, right? It's recontextualized where it's exhibited and what it's exhibited next to. It changes the narrative, how it's actually revealed. And you do a fabulous job. I have to say, you do a really fabulous job of telling different stories using different combinations of objects. So I could come in to the Peabody Essex Museum and over years and over exhibit, and this is all intentional, right? I mean, this is not like coincidental. This is actually planned by your people. I can come in and I can see the same object and have a half a dozen different experiences. To me, that's amazing.
Well, I thank you for saying that. Sounds like we're doing a really good job. Part of it is, I mean, I think there are times when museums have used art as illustrations of points, and that's not what we do. I mean, you're talking about the context, and the context is really the storytelling part. In terms of, why was it important at a particular moment in time? Is it possible then to think that that has relevance for us today, and why? Why did someone make something? How did someone make something? I mean,
techniques.
Yeah,
There's that stick that was found.
The maritime, yeah,
on the maritime collection, and the artist craftsperson, them creating that story. That is a work of art. It's also a story. It's also about a time. That is a fabulous example. And I saw a recent exhibit there, which was about South Asian. It was a series of illustrations of a legend that comes out of, I think, the Baba.
You went into the South Asian gallery, so you were looking at the Hussein paintings, yeah.
And how your curators actually described the use of color and gold to emphasize certain frames was just great, right? I could see the work, and by paying attention, I had a different experience of just seeing an illustration someplace on a screen.
Yeah. Well, we don't believe in books on the wall. So I also don't want people to come away from this interview thinking that we've got tons and tons of text on the wall, because we want people to look. So we're very disciplined about, how and what it is that we write for the text labels. We will also have lots of interactives and videos and, that sort of thing. And that's not all that unusual in art museums. I would say that in our galleries devoted to the interaction of Native American and American art from our collection, one of the things that we did was to work very closely with Native American representatives from many different perspectives, and they were invited to contribute labels to the installation, and they could pick whatever they wanted to write about, and some Indigenous representatives picked non-native works, and some picked native works that weren't necessarily from their affiliation or their tribe citizenship. So it was fascinating, but just even having different voices within the institution's presentation has been meaningful. I would also say we pay a tremendous amount of attention to design, the physical environment, in terms of, simple things like, is it comfortable? Is it inviting?
That museum was tough to program previously. It's better now, but just because there were a lot of twisty little passages and narrow spaces and no place to sit and awkward places to sit.
Well, that's all changed. I mean, but it is an accretion of buildings, and we have the new wing that opened in 2019, thanks to Ennead Architects. But really, we're very much into experience design, because what we want people to do is to have an experience. So we look at an exhibition or a collection installation or a public program as an experience. And increasingly what's embedded in what we do is this whole combination of an experience that is both physical and emotional and intellectual, and then again, that gets to the mix of things.
I love the fact that you provide your Museum of the North Shore of Massachusetts. I love that. I love the historic houses. If it were not for the Peabody Essex Museum and the board and the predecessor boards, those houses would all be destroyed, right?
I can't answer that for sure that way, Mark. I mean, there was a time in Salem's history in the 1960s where a certain portion of the town was threatened, and then it was, halted and, what have you. But I would never go so far as to say that we own 21 historic properties, and proudly so. And we're trying to figure out how to activate their interpretation as well.
And then you also have the Yin Yu Tang house that you imported, which is a fabulous historic home that also was threatened with perhaps
No, was not threatened. Was not
no?
threatened. No,
Okay.
not at all. It would have continued in its southeastern China village. But what you're talking about is Yin Yutang, and it's a circa 1800 merchant's house. That is the only example of such a house in the United States, and it's of the same period of many of our historic properties. So there's an intriguing, again, across the cultures kind of connection that we try to make for people. But it was a multi-family house, and many of the historic properties that we own were single family domiciles built by really wealthy people in Salem who were also merchants. So again, it's an example of, what is it that we share as human beings? And yet, how do we also honor differences? That I think is something that we strive to offer people on a regular basis.
Now, museums don't, and the museum experience has not been static, and we are seeing nationally a diminution of attendance and engagement, and people moving more toward these devices and computers and online stuff. You haven't stayed still, but you've also been very intentional about the actual in-person experience
Mm-hmm.
of the institution. Could you talk about how you personally think about exposing art through a combination of online accessible materials and that in-person piece, and how programming you see evolving? How do you see programming evolving and the relationship with users of these devices who you also want to have all come into your museum? How do you see that actually evolving going into the future, Lynda?
Well, again, it's a combination of things. I mean, we look at our website as a source of invitational information, as preparation and sort of attraction. It's a magnet, if you will, a teaser. So some museums websites are like, research everything, see everything in our collection on the website. And, that's, we have close to 1 million objects. We're never going to have 1 million objects on our website. So our website has to function in a different way. So it's partly preparation for coming to visit the museum. And then it's like, well, if you want to think about something after you've been there, then you have a resource. So the in-person piece is really important. And it's not because of we want to be able to count how many people who came to the museum. Yes, attendance is meaningful because it's a source of revenue, but we're not in a major metropolitan area, so our admissions fees are never going to be a principal source of revenue for us. And, some of this really does stem from the belief that if you provide an environment in which the product of human beings across time and in different places really demonstrate the possibilities of what human beings can accomplish, then that's the experience.
You're looking to inspire.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're looking to inspire by example. This is real stuff.
Yeah.
This is real things that we did in the past, others did in the past, and this is what we can do today. This is what we're presenting today. These are the designs that we're, even Noguchi, who says, I am not a designer, right? He was a designer. He wasn't a designer. What does that mean? We can have that discussion.
Yeah, and so you're referring to a show that we're going to be opening later this summer. So and as you mentioned, the past. I mean, we have found that this combination of incorporating contemporary art from around the world with historical material. Again, it's an opportunity to understand that, certain cultures are not just ancient. They still exist. They're still active. They're still very much participating in the world. So again, it's like, opening up the eyes. And yes, we can talk about museums as providing a place of respite and escape from the busyness of the world. I mean, actually, one of our recent marketing campaigns was based on the concept of escape the algorithm. Come and, feel something, see something, experience something. Again, going back to what it means to be in person with people. We're fortunate. Our attendance is back to where it was pre-COVID, which is great. But we attribute that to the fact that we are very conscious about listening to people's needs and expectations and figuring out, is there a distinct way in which our museum can help do that?
And I think that is the key. You and your team have created for this institution positioning within the public's mind that is quite unique. If you want to experience your collections, your thinking, how your people put things together, you actually have to come and be present at the Peabody Essex Museum. You have to attend. Lynda Hartigan, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful work that you've done that I've actually benefited from through decades, and you've always been so informative and helpful as we've conducted searches for others. We really appreciate it, and thank you so much. Please thank, by the way, your board members, your staff, your donors, your supporters, your audiences, all the folks who come.
Well, it's we're all in it together, and truly this concept of our shared humanity, and how is it that we can share? Why is it that we should be sharing at this moment in time? Is really, really important. And, it's been fun to do this. I know we've talked about doing this for a while. So I thank you for the opportunity. And I just love the fact that you love Pam.
Peabody Essex Museum, the North Shore of Massachusetts. Come to Salem, come to the Peabody Essex Museum, right?
Yes, you bet. Thank you.